Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. I'm back to work on the 756 today, putting back together the MCV, or multiple control valve, the heart of the hydraulic system. I went through all my parts and did what I call the initial cleaning, which was, to get the gaskets removed with a wire brush and clean them all up in the parts washer. Here are the valves, or all of the check valves, all this gizmos that go in the bore. Remember, I line them up by bore so that I know which goes where and what goes with what. And my new parts came in the mail a couple days ago, and I guess first and foremost, I got a new hydraulic pump. All these parts came from, I bought them through Red Run Right in Wisconsin, I think. And they're made by High Capacity, and they're in, I don't remember where they are. They're in the Midwest. They make high quality parts. I've got a gasket kit here, and that came with O-rings. I got a new ceramic pad for the transmission brake. I got a new spring kit for the MCV, and so nice, High Capacity labeled the spring with a number. There's a spring back there, and then provided a diagram for where each spring goes so you don't get them messed up. That's really important. When doing parts cleaning, it's a really good opportunity to closely look at each thing you pulled apart, and I did that with this system. And here's a part that I found a potential issue with. This is the sump check valve. I talked about this quite a bit when I was testing the system. It fits into the clutch housing down here. And what it does is, when it's working right and you've got pressure in the MCV, it holds against a seat and holds that pressure behind it in the hydraulic circuit. When it comes into play is when the tractor is shut off and you want to use, if you want to try to manually steer the tractor, this valve will actually open up and let fluid into the MCV from this cavity, which is filled up with fluid, and allow you to use kind of hand hydraulic pressure to turn the steering. So that's when it comes into play. It was one of the primary suspects, pump and this little check valve, for the issues that I was seeing with the tractor. So I looked at this thing awful close. It's got a pretty good wear ring around it where it seats into the bore. I hope that that's in focus. And it's one of those things where it might be okay, but hydraulics are all about the details. And with that wear ring on there, I really don't feel comfortable spending all the money for all new parts and putting that back in and, trusting that it's working right. So I ordered a new one. The new one of these little guys here through IH dealers, 60 bucks, 60 bucks. Makes you cry, but one of the things, one of the old sayings that really applies is something's only expensive if it doesn't work. If this MCV goes back together and everything works right, I'll probably forget about that cost pretty quick, but it had to be done. I know I'm jib-jabbing a lot here, and I apologize. I don't normally start videos this way, but there's something else I wanted to mention. I had to get the gasket off of this here, and you can clean things that are off the tractor in the parts washer and use a wire brush to get the gasket off. On here, you've got all these little passages. You don't want to use a grinder or a wire brush on this and get debris all scattered into the passages. So I have this really handy tool for removing gaskets that Dad gave me. It's a snap-on, and it's a pneumatic gasket remover. So this goes into compressed air, and this chisel head vibrates really fast. And how much it vibrates depends on the pressure you're using, but you can just peel the gasket right off there and come back to a clean surface. I said that I did the initial cleaning. This is my piece one of the reassembly. I did the initial cleaning in my parts washer under here. I'm going to clean it with lacquer thinner to get any oil residue off of it. With hydraulic work, if you look at the old manuals, cleanliness. It's all about cleanliness. Look very carefully at all these passages. Make sure nothing comes up on your cleaning rag. These gasket surfaces, I am cleaning them, but after I assemble, I will clean them again with lacquer thinner so I have a spotless surface to seat the gasket on. I want to spray these out with some carburetor cleaner just to flush any remaining goo from the parts washer out of these interior parts. Here's my setup for rebuilding. I've got a cup full of High-Tran. The genuine stuff from Case IH smells like money to me. There's only about 50 bucks in that cup worth. I have the I&T manual, which has a simplified exploded diagram of this assembly, and then I have the parts manual, which is a little bit harder to read, which is why I like to go to the I&T. And then I have my new O-rings that came in a pack, all in Tupperware here so that I don't lose any of them. First thing to put in is this safety valve. Remember, this regulates pressure for the entire unit and dumps when it goes over pressure. This is a brand new safety valve that came with the kit. First thing I need to do is put a new O-ring on the fitting or the plug that contains it in the unit. Take this old one off. Look for a match in my mess here. That one looks like a match. Always dip the O-ring in the High-Tran. Run it over the plug. Dip this whole teal in High-Tran. Everything goes together with High-Tran. It's going to get kind of messy, but that's a good thing. Everything gets lubricated. Drop that in. The safety valve, the O-ring seats down in the bore here. Press it until it seats. And put the plug back on. We're doing the easy ones first. Next is this guy, which is just a plug with an O-ring on it. Put him back in. The next fitting has a new spring to go in it, and that's the oil cooler bypass valve. And here's my key that they gave me with the spring kit. Spring oil cooler bypass valve 06, 56, and 66 series. There were two different ones. The 86s and 88s used a different one. 9B 382 299. 382 299. There's my spring. Here's my new spring. We can check it against the old spring. That's quite a difference in free length, and kind of makes me happy that I ordered a new spring kit. Now we can go ahead and put this in. It goes together like this. And I want to show you something. When you're putting stuff like this together, you can look for marks that tell you which way things go. See those marks? There's a pair of them, which means this is either turned or been out once already, but you can see what was riding on it in the bore. So I know it goes in this way, and I'll get to why after I get it in. The reason I know I got everything in right is because this pin goes in. You remember from the disassembly video, this pin goes in and holds this valve down in. So if I push the valve down, then I can slide the pin in and it comes through. And there's what it looks like down in there with the pin holding the spring tension on the relieving valve. And that means we're done with this side. I put the plug in, the valve, the brake lines attach onto these two ports. There's nothing else that goes in this one. We'll start on the other side next. First we have, this is just a plain old plug that goes in here, and there's a restricting orifice down below that restricts flow. Next is kind of a biggie. It's the flow control valve. I have the sense it does big things. Yeah. Let's put a new O-ring on this. Find a match. Here's a new spring for it. That one's pretty close to the same length, although you can't, it's a little bit longer. Well, I'm glad I got new springs. This is messy, but it's a clean sort of messy. That guy goes on there like that, and the whole deal slides right in here. Let's put that in first. I didn't like the way that felt. I'm going to pull it back out and take a look. Thank goodness for blind hole pullers. Since I bought a set, I found lots of uses for it. So I used it to pull this back out, and it turns out what I was feeling was just air escaping as it gets to the bottom. It's that. But, you know, these things are all about feel. How do things feel going together? I struggle a bit with how to theme these videos. You know, is it for entertainment? Is it for education? Certainly, I went looking around and there's nobody else. I couldn't find any videos about rebuilding an MCV valve. And so I thought, well, this is an important thing to document. But the other thing is that mechanical work is just about being careful, checking things, making sure things fit together properly or feel right. And I'm trying to convey that more than anything else, the sort of conscientiousness and the basic tools that it needs. Then you can do just about anything with mechanics as far as putting stuff back together, taking it apart. Do I have the right wrench for that? Nope. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to walk a line between being educational and it being entertainment. Most of the people who watch this video will never work on an MCV, but you put this video out on YouTube and you hope that somebody someday is going to need to see it done so that they can do it themselves, and they'll find this video where there weren't any before. I guess that's my hope. To fulfill both purposes, you kind of walk the line between the two. Next in line is the lube regulator valve. Yep, lube regulator valve. This is the old spring that was on it. I got a new spring here for it. The new spring, let me get them held up here, is a little bit longer. Interesting. I didn't expect I would see that much difference due to spring fatigue, but there you go. This one's got witness marks on it, just like that other one did, where you can see where the peg ran through it. So I know I'm on the right track. Spring goes on. It goes down in the bore, all lubricated. You make sure everything gets set in there the right way here. And that we've got smooth action. And then we have another one of those pins that goes in the hole right there to hold it in with some spring pressure on it. And then it'll get trapped by the cover plates later on. And then finally on top goes the plug. And this hole right here is where that sensor goes that we took out to do testing. Lube regulator. The next one up the line is the clutch dump valve, and I got to do some extra disassembly on this to get everything replaced. This comes off. There should be an O-ring in there. Yeah, right back in there. Got to replace that. Got to replace the spring. I have a new spring here. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Gosh darn it. Same deal. Springs over time, you know, they lose some of their springiness. A little bit taller. That goes on there. Then we have to pull the O-rings off of this fitting here. One on the inside, one on the outside. Definitely needs to be replaced. It's pretty fatigued. Wow. Is that all that's left of it? Oh my gosh. That's all that was left of it. Just that little piece. Boy, that must have been leaking pretty good. Here's what remained of that O-ring. And there's the new O-ring. This is a dump valve, so it gets used a lot whenever you push in the clutch. So it's understandable that there would be wear there. Now we have to fit this new one in here. New O-ring on the outside. Fit this back together. Now that we got it together, we got to put this doohickey back on, which helps to hold everything together as well as captures the clutch pedal when you hook that up, or the linkage anyway. Then this whole thing goes right in here. Clutch dump. Good action. Next bore is the pressure regulator. I'll give you two guesses what that does. We got new springs for it, and this is the one with an inner and an outer spring here. This is just repetitive work. I mean, you go bore by bore and you pretty much do the same thing. Replace the pieces that need to be replaced, fit it all together. I almost knocked over my oil again. New one's about a 1/4 inch longer. Now for the inner spring, new one is about 1/8 of an inch longer. These go one inside the other. And the inner one's a little bit shorter than the outer one, so when the outer one comes down enough to hit the inner one, then all of a sudden you have an increase in resistance. Yep. In you go. There you go. This is the one that went kerflooey on me. That's going to be fun to push in. Are you in all the way? That wasn't fitting together right. There was too much spring exposed, and that's why you go back and you look and double check your work. Here's what I'm working on right here. The springs go in first, not second. Springs, seat into there. Springs go in first. And then that valve pushes down in there like that. See how that works in there? Opening and closing the passages, depending on what you're doing. Regulating pressure Regulate, regulate. And this plug goes right on top of this. Still got to push, but not quite as much. Testing thumb strength. Rather than busting my thumb, I figured, well, I got a tool for that, hopefully. There we go. Next is the brake check valve. This is where the brake plumbs into it. That little plastic doohickey is the check valve. And then I have a new spring for it, which is quite a bit longer than the old spring. Check valve goes in first and then spring. Dip them in fluid. Check valve in first. Then spring. And then this fitting goes on top. The last bore in this is occupied by the selector for the torque amplifier here, and this requires some further disassembly. There's a retaining ring on the outside here that needs to come off. Here she comes. Retaining ring, then this should come off. There we go. Ah, there's a little pin in there that needs to come out. The torture never ends. Are you going to come out? You're just a little teeny tiny thing. Every time I buy a teeny tiny punch, I wind up bending it, and then it breaks. Here's the point of an old teeny tiny punch. I guess that worked. When this comes apart, you've got the valve spool down here, and that's got a separate little plunger thingy in there. We'll clean that up. And then you've got two springs in here. Except this time, the inner spring takes compression until it engages the fatter outer spring. Very interesting. And then another O-ring on the inside and the outside. We got to change those. All right, here we go. This was a joy to get back together. With the spring tension and things, new O-rings, all that. Before we tighten up the valve, you can see it. See the spool going down through here? And if we work it, we can see how it uncovers and alternately closes and opens certain passages based on where the spool is. And that's why TA adjustment's so important when you adjust the linkages up top, because you want to keep it in the right spot. Here are the next steps for this valve. So gasket goes on here, and then this cover goes on. And you got 3 shorties here to hold the cover on while you get everything else assembled. And then on the other side, gasket, and then that cover goes on. And then the pump gets installed right where you see that outline there with O-rings there. And then gasket, and then it goes on the tractor. And I think that's where I'm going to stop the video, and I'll do a part 2 because I'm waiting for that little bitty plastic thing, check valve, to arrive in the mail. And I don't want to sandwich everything together on the gaskets until I'm ready to put it in, because I've got all those bolts to put in to draw it down on the gaskets when it's mounted on the tractor. So in the next episode, I'll finish the MCV, we'll put the pump on and all that, put the MCV on, do the transmission brake, put that back on, and button this little part of the 756 up. I hope this video was enjoyable and informative. That's my goal for these things. I'll see you next time. Yep, enjoyable and informative. I try.